Marcus was a quiet young man who had grown up surrounded by wide fields and open skies. His father was a farmer, known in their small town for being steady, hardworking, and kind. Every morning before the sun came up, Marcus would help on the farm feeding animals, fixing fences, and sometimes standing beside his father as they repaired old machines that kept the farm running. By the time he turned 19, he already knew more about engines, gears, and bolts than most people twice his age. But Marcus never bragged about it. He dressed simply, kept to himself, and rarely talked unless someone asked him a direct question. He preferred listening, watching, and learning. That summer, when the farming season slowed down for a while, Marcus decided to take a part-time job at a large agricultural factory in the nearby city. It was a chance to earn some extra money for college and also to see more of the world beyond his father's fields. On his first day at the factory, Marcus showed up early. He wore plain jeans, an old work shirt, and boots that carried dust from the farm. The building was massive, full of noise and movement, conveyor belts rolling, machines thundering, and workers hurrying in different directions. Marcus quietly joined the group of new hires, waiting for instructions. As the day went on, Marcus worked with focus. He followed orders without complaint, stacked boxes, moved equipment, and paid close attention to the way the machines worked. Some of the older workers noticed him staring at the gears and belts, but they thought he was just a curious boy who didn't yet know how things were done. That afternoon, the factory had an unexpected visitor. The CEO of the company, a tall man in a sharp suit, came in to check on production. Whenever the CEO visited, the managers grew nervous and the workers made sure to look busy. He was a man who liked efficiency and didn't have patience for delays. As he walked through the factory floor, he noticed one of the main machines had stopped running. Workers were standing around it, scratching their heads, while boxes piled up behind the jammed conveyor belt. The sound of silence from that machine was enough to make everyone uneasy. "What's wrong here?" the CEO demanded, his voice carrying over the noise of the other machines. "Sir, the machine's not working," one of the supervisors explained nervously. "We've called maintenance, but it might take a while." The CEO's expression hardened. Time was money, and a broken machine meant loss. He looked around and his eyes landed on Marcus, who was standing nearby, holding a box he had been moving. The boy looked calm, not panicked like the others. "You," the CEO pointed at Marcus. "Yes, you. Don't just stand there. Fix it." The workers froze. Some of them exchanged amused looks. To them, Marcus was just a farmer's son who had started work that morning. What could he possibly know about fixing a complicated factory machine? A few even chuckled quietly, thinking the CEO must be joking. Marcus didn't laugh. He set down the box carefully and stepped toward the machine. His face showed no fear, only quiet focus. The workers whispered among themselves, waiting to see him fail. But Marcus didn't rush. He walked around the machine slowly, his eyes moving from one part to another, studying it like a doctor studying a patient. "What's he doing?" someone muttered. "Probably trying to look smart," another replied with a smirk. The CEO tapped his foot impatiently. "Well? Do you know what you're doing?" Marcus looked up respectfully and said in a calm voice, "I need to see the inside before I can tell what's wrong." The CEO raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to being answered so directly by a new worker, especially one who looked like he belonged out in the fields rather than in a factory. Still, something about Marcus's steady tone made him pause. He motioned for the machine to be opened. As the panel came off, Marcus leaned in. His hands moved carefully, brushing away dust and examining the gears. He didn't speak much, but every now and then, he muttered to himself, "That belt's too tight, this lever is jammed, oil line's not feeding right." The older workers grew quiet. They realized Marcus wasn't just staring randomly, he actually understood what he was looking at. Finally, Marcus straightened up and turned to the CEO. I think I know the problem, he said simply. The CEO narrowed his eyes. Oh really? And what might that be? Marcus pointed at a section of the machine. This part isn't broken. It's just misaligned. If I adjust it and loosen the belt here, it should start working again. The oil feed needs cleaning too. The CEO crossed his arms, clearly doubtful. You're telling me you can fix this faster than the trained mechanics we hired? Marcus didn't argue. He only said, I can try. For a long moment, the CEO studied him. Around them, the workers waited, half amused, half curious. Finally, the CEO waved his hand. Fine. Go ahead. Let's see what you can do. Marcus nodded and carefully knelt by the machine. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong arms earned from years of farm work. With calm movements, he adjusted the belt, tightened a few bolts, and cleaned the small clog in the oil feed. His fingers moved with confidence, as if he had done this many times before. The workers leaned closer, watching in silence. The CEO stood behind him, expecting the boy to fail and ready to call for real mechanics. But within minutes, Marcus stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and pressed the start button. The machine roared back to life. The conveyor belt rolled smoothly, the gears turned without trouble, and the boxes began moving again as if nothing had ever happened. The workers gasped. Some even clapped without thinking. The supervisor's jaw dropped. The CEO blinked, surprised, then quickly masked his expression with a frown, as if he had expected it all along. Marcus stepped back quietly. He didn't ask for praise, didn't look proud. He simply said, it should run fine now, but the oil line will need a full cleaning later. Then he picked up his box again, ready to return to his task. The room was filled with murmurs. The farmer's son had just done what the factory staff couldn't. The CEO stared at him for a long moment, his mind racing with questions. Who was this boy? Where had he learned to handle machines like that? But Marcus didn't say anything more. He went back to work, as if fixing the machine was nothing unusual. The workers looked at each other in disbelief, realizing there was more to Marcus than anyone had guessed. The CEO, still puzzled, made a note to himself, he needed to find out exactly who this boy was. That was the beginning of a story that none of them would ever forget. The hum of the machine filled the air once again, and the workers slowly returned to their tasks, though their eyes still glanced at Marcus from time to time. What had just happened didn't feel normal. To most of them, Marcus had arrived as just another new worker, a quiet boy in worn clothes. Now, in the space of an hour, he had done something that left even experienced staff speechless. The CEO walked away without saying much, but his silence carried weight. His face was calm, yet his mind was turning over the memory of Marcus kneeling by the machine with such calm authority. For the rest of the afternoon, the CEO's eyes occasionally drifted back to the boy, studying him quietly. When the shift ended and most workers headed home, Marcus stayed behind to finish cleaning a workstation. One of the older employees, a man named Daniel, approached him. Daniel had been working at the factory for over 15 years and had seen many young hires come and go. He leaned on the railing, watching Marcus work. You know, Daniel said slowly, most kids wouldn't even touch that machine without waiting for a mechanic. Where did you learn to do that? Marcus smiled faintly and shrugged. My dad taught me. On the farm, machines break down all the time. If you don't fix them yourself, the whole day is wasted. So, I just learned. Daniel raised his eyebrows. You make it sound easy. But not everyone can open up a complicated machine and know where to look. Marcus didn't answer right away. He wiped his hands on a cloth and finally said, I guess when you've worked with your hands long enough, the parts start to make sense. Every machine has a rhythm. You just have to listen. Daniel chuckled softly. Well, you impressed a lot of people today. Even the boss had nothing to say. That's rare. He patted Marcus on the shoulder before heading out. The next morning, the story had already spread through the factory. By the time Marcus arrived, whispers followed him from one side of the building to the other. Some people looked at him with curiosity, others with disbelief. A few even with a trace of envy. "There goes the farmer's boy," one worker muttered. "Thinks he's smarter than the rest of us." Another shook his head. "No, you didn't see it. He actually fixed that machine. It was like he knew it better than the engineers." While some admired him, others began doubting. It was easier to explain away his success as a lucky guess rather than accept that a boy from the fields could outshine trained staff. Later that day, another machine down the line made a strange sound. It didn't stop working, but it rattled in a way that caught Marcus's ear. He glanced at it while carrying a box, his brow furrowing. He set the box down and quietly approached. "Not again," one of the workers groaned when they saw him. "What, are you planning to fix every machine here now?" Marcus didn't rise to the comment. He simply bent down to listen to the rattling gears. He touched the side lightly, feeling the vibration. A young supervisor walked up, arms crossed. "Is there a problem here?" "The bearings are loose," Marcus said calmly. "If it keeps running like this, the motor might burn out. It needs adjusting." The supervisor smirked. "And you're an expert now, are you? You've been here what, 2 days? Leave it for maintenance." Some of the workers nearby nodded in agreement. They were already unsettled by how quickly Marcus had earned attention. If he kept fixing machines, where would that leave them? Marcus didn't argue. He stepped back politely and returned to his work. Hours later, the machine gave a loud snap and stopped, holding up the entire line. The same supervisor who had dismissed Marcus earlier now looked embarrassed. He rushed to call maintenance, but not before several workers glanced at Marcus knowingly. The boy had seen it coming. By the time the mechanics finally arrived, the CEO had already heard about the incident. He returned to the floor, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. "Who knew this machine was going to fail?" he demanded. The room was silent for a moment before someone spoke up. "Marcus said it would." The CEO's eyes landed on the farmer's son once more. Marcus stood quietly, wiping dust from his hands. The CEO's brows drew together. He was beginning to realize this wasn't luck. The boy had real knowledge, knowledge that seemed far beyond his age or background. "Marcus," the CEO called out. "Come here." Marcus walked over, his steps steady. He didn't fidget or look nervous. "Tell me exactly what you noticed about this machine," the CEO ordered. Marcus explained in simple words, how the sound was wrong, how the vibration didn't match the rhythm of the machine, how the bearings needed adjustment. He spoke with such clarity that even those who didn't understand mechanics could follow. The CEO listened carefully, nodding slowly. Then he looked around at the workers. "And none of you thought to check this?" The workers avoided his eyes. When Marcus returned to his tasks, the CEO stayed behind for a moment, deep in thought. He couldn't shake the feeling that the boy reminded him of someone, but he couldn't place it yet. Over the next few days, the same pattern repeated itself. Marcus did his work quietly, but whenever a machine struggled, his eyes would drift to it, and often he could point out the problem before it became serious. Some supervisors began to secretly rely on him, even if they didn't admit it openly. But with growing respect also came doubt and resistance. A few workers whispered that Marcus was showing off, trying to make them look bad. One afternoon, as he bent over a small machine, 2 workers leaned against a nearby wall, watching him with crossed arms. "Who does he think he is?" one muttered. "Fixing machines like he owns the place." "Yeah," the other replied. "The CEO seems to like him. What if he gets promoted? What happens to us?" Their words were carried by the noise of the factory, unheard by Marcus, who remained focused on his task. He wasn't trying to outshine anyone. He simply couldn't ignore a machine in trouble. The CEO, meanwhile, had grown more curious than ever. He started asking subtle questions about Marcus. Where did he come from? Who was his family? The managers gave vague answers. They only knew he was the son of a farmer outside the city. Nothing more. One evening, after everyone had gone home, the CEO lingered in his office, looking out over the factory floor. He thought of Marcus again, the quiet confidence, the calm voice, the way he spoke with knowledge that rivaled his own engineers. It didn't make sense. A boy like that didn't appear out of nowhere. There was more to him, and the CEO was determined to find out what. For Marcus, however, things remained simple. He woke up early, came to work, did his job, and returned home tired but satisfied. He didn't think of himself as special. He didn't care about being noticed. All he cared about was doing things the right way, whether it was lifting a box, fixing a belt, or listening to the hum of a machine. But the tension around him was quietly growing. Respect and suspicion now walked side by side. The CEO was watching him more closely than ever. And the workers, divided between admiration and jealousy, whispered whenever his back was turned. Marcus himself didn't know it yet, but the truth about who he really was and who his father truly was about to come out in the most unexpected way. The following week at the factory began like any other. Workers clocked in, machines whirred to life, and the usual noise filled the air. Marcus blended in with the rest, carrying out his tasks without fuss. But even though he didn't seek attention, people couldn't stop watching him. Some admired him in silence, others whispered with suspicion. A few still doubted his abilities, convinced that what he had done before was nothing more than luck. The CEO, however, carried a different expression. Every time his eyes landed on Marcus, he found himself growing more curious. There was something about the boy, his composure, his confidence, the way he solved problems without hesitation. It reminded the CEO of people he had met before, experienced leaders, engineers, and investors. But Marcus? He was supposed to be just a farmer's son. One morning, trouble struck again. This time it wasn't just a small jam or a loose belt. One of the largest and most complicated machines in the factory suddenly ground to a halt. Sparks had flown, alarms blared, and the workers scrambled to shut it down before more damage was done. The entire production line came to a standstill. Supervisors shouted orders, engineers rushed over, and workers stood around nervously. The factory floor was thick with tension. Every passing minute meant heavy losses. The CEO, who happened to be on site, stormed toward the machine. His face was dark with frustration. "How long until it's fixed?" he demanded. "Sir, we don't know yet," one of the engineers stammered. It's a big issue. Could take hours." The CEO's jaw tightened. "Hours? We don't have hours." His gaze swept over the anxious faces until it landed, once again, on Marcus. The boy was standing a little distance away, quietly observing the chaos. "You," the CEO called sharply, pointing at him. "Come here." The workers turned to look. Some muttered under their breath, others exchanged doubtful glances. "Not again," one whispered. "Is he really going to let that boy touch this machine?" Marcus walked forward without hesitation. His calm steps stood in contrast to the panic around him. "Tell me," the CEO said firmly, "what do you see?" Marcus studied the machine for a moment. He didn't answer right away. He listened to the silence of the halted gears, the faint ticking of cooling metal, the smell of burnt oil in the air. Then he crouched down, examined the base, and looked at the belts and pulleys. Finally, he stood and spoke softly. "The wiring is overheated, and one of the parts is misaligned. If we try to force it back on without fixing that, it will burn again." The engineers nearby frowned. "Impossible," one muttered. "That's not the problem." Another shook his head. This machine is too advanced. He wouldn't know. But Marcus ignored the whispers. He stepped closer, running his hand lightly over the side of the machine. If we clean the wiring, realign the gear, and reset the motor, it will work again. I can do it. The CEO raised a brow. You're sure? Marcus nodded once. Yes. The CEO hesitated. He looked at the engineers, who shook their heads in disbelief. But the memory of the last 2 times Marcus had been right echoed in his mind. Slowly, he stepped aside. Fine. Do it. But if you're wrong, it's on you. Marcus knelt down and set to work. He asked for tools calmly, his voice steady. Reluctantly, the supervisors handed them over. Some workers leaned in to watch, while others muttered, convinced this would finally be the moment Marcus failed. But as he worked, it became clear he knew exactly what he was doing. He moved wires carefully, cleaned burned residue with precision, and tightened bolts with practiced ease. Every movement showed confidence, not guesswork. He spoke quietly as he worked, explaining what he was doing in simple words, almost as if teaching those who watched. Machines talk, he said softly. Not with words, but with sounds and movements. If you pay attention, they'll tell you what they need. The workers fell silent. The engineers stopped arguing and instead found themselves listening. Even the CEO, who had his arms crossed with doubt, leaned closer. Finally, Marcus stood up, sweat on his forehead but a calm look on his face. Try it now, he said. The CEO gave a signal. A worker pressed the button. For a moment, there was silence. Then the machine roared back to life, stronger and smoother than before. The belts rolled perfectly, the gears spun without a hitch, and the factory floor filled with the steady rhythm of production once more. The silence that followed was broken by gasps and murmurs. A few workers clapped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The engineers stared, stunned that the boy had fixed in under an hour what they believed would take most of the day. The CEO stood frozen, his sharp eyes locked on Marcus. The boy didn't look smug or proud. He simply wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back. It should be fine now, he said. But you'll want to replace that wire soon. It was then that the CEO felt something stir in his memory. The way Marcus spoke, the calm authority, the hands that moved like they had years of practice, it reminded him of someone. Someone he had met before at a business meeting. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. What did you say your father does again? Marcus looked up, meeting his eyes with quiet respect. He's a farmer, sir. The CEO frowned slightly. That didn't add up. He had once met a man, an investor and landowner, who had spoken the same way, with the same calm wisdom. Could it be? His mind began to race, but he kept his expression controlled. Meanwhile, the factory buzzed with excitement. Workers whispered to each other, some amazed, others uneasy. Did you see that? He fixed it again. It wasn't luck this time. He knew exactly what he was doing. I don't understand. He's just a farmer's boy. How is this possible? As the chatter spread, Marcus quietly returned to his tasks. He had no interest in fame or recognition. To him, it was simple: if something was broken, you fixed it. That was all. But the CEO was no longer satisfied with not knowing. He watched Marcus with narrowed eyes, his thoughts heavy. The boy wasn't ordinary. That much was clear. And if his father truly was just a farmer, then that farmer was no ordinary man either. The tension in the factory shifted. Respect for Marcus was growing, but so was curiosity and doubt. Who was he, really? Why did he seem to know more about machines than trained experts? And what kind of father could raise a son like this? The CEO knew one thing for certain: he had underestimated Marcus once, and he wouldn't do it again. The truth was closer than ever, and he intended to uncover it soon. The day after Marcus had fixed the largest machine, the whole factory seemed different. Workers who once ignored him now glanced at him with curiosity and even respect. Some greeted him with a nod. Others whispered quietly whenever he walked past. It was as if Marcus carried a mystery on his shoulders, one that nobody could quite figure out. But for Marcus, nothing had changed. He still arrived early, still worked hard, and still kept to himself. He didn't see himself as special. He just did what needed to be done. Yet, behind the scenes, the CEO's curiosity about him only grew stronger. That morning, the CEO invited a group of managers into his office overlooking the factory floor. They sat around a long table, papers and charts in front of them, but the conversation quickly turned to Marcus. "You've all seen him," the CEO said, his voice calm but firm. "This boy, this farmer's son. He has done what even trained engineers could not. Does anyone know more about him?" The managers exchanged glances. Finally, one spoke. "Sir, his name is Marcus. He's 19. Lives just outside the city with his family. His father owns a farm. That's all we know." The CEO leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And you are certain his father is only a farmer?" "Yes, sir," another manager replied. "That's what he said when we hired him. A farmer." The CEO drummed his fingers on the desk. His instincts told him there was more to the story. He remembered, years ago, meeting a man who carried himself with quiet confidence, a man who spoke about land, machines and investments as if he understood them better than anyone else in the room. That man had left an impression on him. And now, watching Marcus, he felt that same impression return. Later that afternoon, the CEO decided to act. He walked the floor, inspecting work as usual, but his eyes searched for Marcus. He found him near a smaller machine, carefully adjusting a lever that had been sticking all morning. "Marcus," the CEO called. Marcus straightened up quickly. "Yes, sir." "Come with me," the CEO said. His tone left no room for questions. The workers nearby exchanged glances as Marcus followed the CEO into his office. Once the door closed behind them, the noise of the factory faded away. The room was quiet, lined with books, charts, and photographs of the company's history. The CEO gestured for Marcus to sit, though the boy remained standing politely. The CEO studied him for a moment before speaking. "You have impressed me," the CEO said. "More than once. You fix machines without hesitation. You speak with certainty. You show skill far beyond your years. Where does this come from?" Marcus shifted slightly but answered simply. "From my father, sir. He taught me everything I know. On the farm, machines are always breaking. If you don't fix them, you can't work. He made sure I learned." The CEO leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What is your father's name?" Marcus hesitated only a moment before answering. When the name left his lips, the CEO froze. It was the same name he remembered from years ago, the man who had sat across from him in a boardroom, the man who had spoken with quiet strength and confidence, the man whose handshake had carried weight. The CEO's mind raced. He remembered hearing whispers back then that the man had invested in land, in machines, and even in agricultural companies. Could it be that the farmer was not just a farmer, but one of the silent investors in his own company? The CEO sat back slowly, covering his surprise with a careful expression. "I see," he said quietly. Marcus, unaware of the storm in the CEO's thoughts, simply added, "My father doesn't talk much about business. He just works hard and teaches me to do the same." The CEO studied him for a long moment. Finally, he stood. "Marcus, you may return to your work." Marcus nodded respectfully and left the office. The CEO remained behind, deep in thought. If his suspicion was correct, then the boy's father was not just a simple farmer, but a powerful man who had chosen to live quietly. And this boy, this humble, hard-working young man was his son. By the next day, the truth began to spread. One of the managers, curious after hearing the CEO's questions, had made a few calls. Soon enough, whispers reached the floor. Marcus's father wasn't just a farmer. He was a respected landowner, an investor, and one of the silent partners in the company itself. The workers could hardly believe it. The boy they had thought was ordinary, the one they had doubted and teased at first, turned out to be the son of someone with real power and wealth. At lunch, the factory buzzed with talk. Did you hear? His father owns half the land outside the city. Not only that, he's invested in this very company. The CEO knows him. You mean all this time we've been looking down on the boss's partner's son? Marcus walked into the break room quietly, holding his lunch. The chatter stopped for a moment as everyone turned to look at him. Some faces showed embarrassment. Others showed respect. A few still looked uneasy, not sure how to treat him now. Marcus, however, seemed unchanged. He greeted them politely, sat down in the corner, and ate without fuss. He didn't act different. He didn't demand attention. To him, he was still the same person. But the CEO now carried himself differently around Marcus. He spoke to him with a touch of respect, no longer barking orders as before. He understood now who the boy was, and more importantly, who his father was. Later that week, the CEO made a quiet trip to Marcus's family farm. The land stretched wide, full of healthy crops and sturdy equipment. Marcus's father came out to greet him, dressed in simple clothes but carrying the same calm authority Marcus had. The CEO shook his hand firmly. I didn't realize your son was working at my factory, he said. Marcus's father smiled. He wanted to learn. I told him the best way was to start from the bottom, like any other worker. The CEO nodded slowly, respect shining in his eyes. It all made sense now, the boy's knowledge, his confidence, his humility. He was being raised not just to understand machines, but to understand people, work, and responsibility. When the CEO left the farm, he carried with him a new perspective. The boy he had once dismissed as just a farmer's son had turned out to be someone far greater. And the lesson was clear: never judge a person by appearances, because hidden strength and wisdom often lie where you least expect them. Back at the factory, the story of Marcus and his father became something people spoke about with pride. The workers no longer doubted him. Instead, they looked at him as an example of quiet strength, humility, and hidden potential. Marcus, as always, simply returned to work the next day as though nothing had changed. But deep down, he knew one thing had: respect had been earned, not because of who his father was, but because of what he himself had done. The weeks that followed brought a calm but noticeable change inside the factory. The workers no longer whispered with doubt when Marcus passed by. Instead, they greeted him politely, sometimes even asking small questions about the machines. A few of the engineers, who once dismissed him, now quietly watched how he worked, hoping to learn from his careful eye and steady hands. Marcus remained the same. He still wore simple clothes, arrived early, and left late. He never mentioned his father's name or his family's standing, even though most people in the factory now knew the truth. To Marcus, it didn't matter who his father was. What mattered was how he carried himself every day, how he did his work, and how he treated others. The CEO, however, was not the same man as before. He had been humbled. He remembered the day he had pointed at Marcus and told him to fix a machine, thinking he was just another ordinary worker. Now he looked back at that moment with quiet embarrassment. The boy he had underestimated turned out to be not only skilled, but also the son of a man who had silently invested in the very company the CEO led. One morning, during a staff meeting, the CEO paused and glanced at Marcus, who was busy across the floor. That boy, he said to the managers standing beside him, reminds me why respect should never depend on appearances. You never know who someone truly is or what they are capable of. Word of the CEO's change in attitude spread through the factory as quickly as the earlier whispers had. The same workers who once doubted Marcus began to admire his humility. They realized that, even after his father's name was revealed, Marcus never once boasted about it. He let his actions, his knowledge, and his character speak for him. One afternoon, as Marcus was repairing a small belt near the back of the floor, an older worker approached him. It was Samuel, one of the few who had laughed the loudest when Marcus was first told to fix a machine. Samuel stood awkwardly for a moment, then cleared his throat. "Marcus," he began, "I wanted to say something." Marcus looked up with his calm smile. "Yes. I was wrong about you," Samuel admitted. "We all were. I thought you were just a farmer's boy trying to prove something. But I see now, you never wanted to show off. You just wanted to do your job right. That takes a kind of strength I didn't understand before. So, I'm sorry." Marcus nodded gently. "There's nothing to be sorry for," he said simply. "Everyone has their own way of seeing things. What matters is that we all do our best." Samuel left with relief, and that moment quietly softened the hearts of many others who had once doubted Marcus. A week later, the CEO called Marcus into his office once more. The boy stepped inside, respectful as always, and stood waiting. "Marcus," the CEO began, "you've been working here for some time now. I've seen your skill, your discipline, and your humility. Most people, in your place, would use their father's name to demand respect. You never did. That says more about you than anything else." Marcus shifted slightly, unsure what to say. The CEO continued, "I want you to know that this company is stronger with people like you in it. You've reminded all of us that real strength doesn't come from titles or positions, it comes from character. And that's something no machine can measure." Marcus bowed his head politely. "Thank you, sir. I just try to do what my father taught me, to work hard, stay humble, and respect others." The CEO smiled faintly, a rare expression for him. "Your father raised you well. And I must say, he's a wiser man than I ever realized. I owe him my respect. And I owe you mine as well." That day, when Marcus left the office, he felt no pride swelling in his chest. He wasn't seeking recognition, and he didn't feel like a hero. He simply felt thankful for his father's lessons, for the chance to work, and for the respect that had grown naturally through his actions. As the summer came to an end, Marcus prepared to leave the factory. His time there had taught him much more than he expected. He had not only worked hard but had also seen how quickly people could judge and how just as quickly they could change their views when given reason. On his last day, the workers gathered to shake his hand. Some wished him luck in college, others thanked him for teaching them new ways to listen to the machines. Even the supervisors who had once dismissed him gave him warm words. When he finally left through the factory doors, the CEO himself walked him out. The two paused outside, the noise of the city faint in the distance. "Marcus," the CEO said, "I have no doubt you'll go far in life. Not because of your father's name, though that is respected, but because of who you are. Remember, this humility and skill will always open doors that money and power cannot." Marcus smiled softly. "I'll remember, sir." As he walked down the road toward home, the sun setting behind him, Marcus felt no need to look back. He had left an impression that would last long after he was gone. Inside the factory, his name would not be remembered for being the son of a wealthy man, but for being the boy who fixed machines, who stayed humble, and who taught everyone, including the CEO, that true respect is earned through character. Back on the farm, his father welcomed him with a nod and a simple smile. They didn't speak much about the factory. They didn't need to. Marcus knew his father was proud, not because of the company, or the machines, or even the CEO's respect, but because Marcus had carried himself with honor. The lesson Marcus had lived out was clear: a person's worth isn't measured by clothes, titles, or appearances. It's measured by what they do when challenges come, by the steadiness of their hands, the strength of their character, and the humility of their heart. And in that simple truth, Marcus found peace.